Mr. Olubunmi Ajayi, who is a former president, Association of Professional Bodies of Nigeria. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting. Some members of the House of Reps have spoken up against their limitation or the challenge they face when they make recommendations or even adopt any such from these probe panels, which we see now and then. In fact, we're expecting that of the oil and gas sector recently. So if that comes up, who knows what becomes of it. One has already been adopted and recommended by the Senate, that of the BPE, perhaps gathering dust somewhere. And all of this just, to some extent, in the mindsets of people, waters down the essence of all of these probe panels. What can possibly be the way out of this?
Yes, you see, the National Assembly has oversight functions. It is in the process of exercising these oversight functions that we start talking about probes. Technically, the issue that they're not supposed to be probing. It is when they find something that they now go further. And they're supposed to do some preliminary findings and things like this. And so based on that, they can now really move a motion and say, we found something that think something is wrong in so place. Mr. President, inquire about it. You see, what has been happening so far, and that's the real problem, that after they do all this oversight function thing, they convert it to a probe. They take resolutions, pass it to the executive, didn't know anything about it in the first instance. But that is not a good excuse for the executive not to do anything. Because the fact that the National Assembly had to go to that extent shows that the executive has abandoned its responsibilities. Because if not, ordinarily, the National Assembly is an oversight function ordinarily. It's not supposed to have developed to the level of in-depth probe like we have now started seeing and things like that. It's an abandonment of responsibility by the executive, for which the Mr. President should be called to order or should be even sanctioned. Because once the National Assembly is oversight, just oversee. But by the time it gets to the level now where I have to now go into it, then it means you're supposed to go into it, you're not doing your work.
Well, you know, yesterday when I watched Representative Femi Gbejabiamila talk about this particular matter,
yes,
talking about the willpower of the executive,
that's right,
to actually implement some of these recommendations,
yes,
and now you're actually, hitting it the way he did, because constitutionally, it's just some kind of recommendation and it
that's
ends
right
there. But looking at the executive arm,
yes,
and when we talk about fixing Nigeria,
yes,
shouldn't any genuine recommendations should be looked into if you have to set up your own panel of inquiry,
right,
to also double check such? Is that too much for the executive arm to do?
Actually, that's what I expect the executive to do. Since they abandoned their responsibility, the House is waking them up to their responsibility. Now, even if they hold different positions, they have a responsibility to investigate it, whether what the National Assembly is saying is correct or not. But from my experience in serving on various, my experience of having been a civil servant before, of having served on various government panels, presidential committees and things like that, that so-called office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation takes so much responsibility that it's terribly inefficient, terribly corrupt. I'm seeing it on television.
Really?
Yes, because the man that has been arrested about pension fund was a director in the office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation. You see, I have served on...
But that doesn't make the entire...
No, I'm saying that the office... That's why I said, that's why I said, from my experience, having been a civil servant, from my experience of having served on various presidential committees, it's so clear, so glaring there, there's so much responsibilities. They have too many things are sent to the Office of Secretary of Government, things to the Office of Secretary of Government. We result that everything ends up in the Office of the Secretary of the Government, and I'm not sure the Office of Secretary of the Government has enough staff to deal with these matters, and I don't think they decentralize enough to be able to do it. Because everything at the end of the day is sent to the Office of Secretary of Government.
But aren't they civil servants who...
They are civil servants. But what I'm saying is that, you see, the Office of the Secretary of Government has become such a clearing house for almost everybody. Even whatever you're doing, when you want to send something to the president, send to the Office of Secretary of Government.
Yeah, but if the civil service were upright, this question of corruption wouldn't arise.
In the first instance, yes. If Nigerians were held upright, they won't. If the civil service is...
Because the FCC chairman lately was making reference to some report somewhere that most of these houses you see in the capital, Abuja,
are built by civil servants.
Civil servants.
Oh, yes. Yes,
and now we see some of them being paraded, and look at the humongous amount of money in the same civil service.
Yes, the civil service is very corrupt. There's no doubt about that. I mean, if we want to, it's just because there's no way of... Somebody should just go and look at all the most expensive houses around. They are owned by civil servants.
How do we... There must be some way to check this.
Yes.
You've been an insider.
Yeah, you see... The leadership must be ready to do it.
What is it?
The leadership must be ready to do it. Mr. President must be ready to stamp out corruption.
How will he go about? How will you suggest he goes about it?
Now, the selection of ministers. Because the ministers are in charge of all these ministries. The president is just one person, he has to live in 4 hours in a day, he has also international engagements. But the ministers that he puts in charge of these ministries is very important. There are ministers and there are ministers. But unfortunately, you see, when you contextualize it within the party system, you discover that a number of ministers were actually imposed on the president by the party. And therefore, there are even some ministers who think they are bigger than the president.
But again, what do they do? When we talk about people now, we're talking about the civil service. Often we've been told that it is the engine room of the government. While you were there, what do you think a civil servant ordinarily would do that you would call a corrupt act? Because do they handle physical cash? What do they truly do, for instance?
No, they keep your records. And that's the nature of our bureaucracies all over the world, that you have a bureaucracy that has to keep your records so your records keep going. Then you have the accounts people who does all your accounting and things like that. But it's what happened over the years. It's just that the value system of the whole nation went berserk. Because I remember when I was in the civil service, the first thing they teach you civil service rules. They have financial instructions which they put you through, so you know, step by step how things have to be done properly. But these days, everybody just looks at it. And I think the point in time, it may be an apologetic thing, or it may be a proper explanation, when the civil servants lost all their interest in what they were doing, was the time they started being sacked on the television due to the military. You see, in the good old days, once you're in the civil service, except you commit serious offense in which they give you a query first time, a second query, a third query, an interdiction before you can be dismissed. And if you go through all that and get dismissed, then something is really must be wrong with you. And therefore, when you get into the civil service, you believe you have a career, and nobody will just terminate that career in the middle of nowhere. And so you have 30, 35 years, and somebody is going to pay you a pension at the end of the day. And so you're contented. You think you have a career already in the civil service. But during the military, people were just sitting down in their offices and they were hearing their names retired. Oh, okay, can be asked to go anytime from anytime T. Therefore, let me help myself before somebody now decides to throw me out. So it was at that point that security of tenure, which the civil servant had always had, which has always given some contentment. I'm here for 30 years, I'm here for 35 years, and at the end of it, somebody is going to be gone.
Is it the one that started with the dismissal of the head of the civil service during the time of late Muritala?
Yes, Muritala was the one that started it. They would just be sitting in the office and we say on the television, 8 o'clock news or something, somebody has been retired. and it's never like that. So once there's no security of tenure, that problem arose right from that time. And how we can now get it back, I think the head of the civil service have to work to work more hard on it.
Do you mean security of job security? Or you mean, because
10-year security.
Let's differentiate that.
Yes.
In terms of maybe someone like the EFCC might have tenure security in the sense that he's got 4 years.
No, those are like semi-political appointment. But the career civil servant who entered as an assistant secretary, or if he's a graduate, he enters as an assistant secretary, senior assistant secretary, principal assistant secretary, and director, permanent secretary. That's a career path. Unlike people who get political appointment to come and serve in 4 months.
His job is secure.
Yes,
then.
It's the civil servants. You see, the civil servants are the ones that have the records. Don't make mistakes. Ministers come, ministers go. If you want to indict a minister with the bad record of the civil servants, they will leak out all the facts after he has left and give it to whoever they want to prosecute him. You see? So that's what I'm saying. You see, once that civil service doesn't feel secure, and that's what we have.
But we left the military era a long time ago. It's
yes, but see, we are still operating semi-military up to now. Even those are presidents, those are national assembly, those are governors. How do they behave? Do they behave like civilians? And then they are still behaving. We are still halfway.
That's quite subjective because it's subjective.
We can discuss it.
The thing will be, how come it's so difficult to reform the civil service? I mean, it's a plan that has always been mooted, but has never seen the light
what happened is that when they talk about reform, they reform various things. The last time, for example, which was a very good one, was that they ensured that almost every senior officer became computer literate. It's part of reform. We may ensure that the pension thing is part of reform. But you see, we are talking in terms of something that's not really physical. It's a security of tenure is not a physical thing. They must be sure that nobody, you see, they have their own procedure for discipline. A situation where you don't allow that procedure to go through, you're still running a semi-military thing. When a civil servant commits an offense, he's supposed to be given a query. He's supposed to answer that query.
No matter how serious the offense is.
Once it's not stealing of money. If it's stealing of money, it can be suspended immediately. Whilst the inquiry is still going on, it won't be dismissed. Until that inquiry is concluded, and they have had his own side of the story, nobody dismisses you like that.
Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult to carry out those recommendations coming in from, let's say, the National Assembly to the Executive, if we have all of that process leading up to some kind of sanction just in case you are a civil servant.
Yeah, but that's the process. You see, they ensure that you have your own, they have your own side of the story. It's not a one-sided affair.
Okay.
Because if you're saying I'm corrupt, bring the evidence.
Shed more light on this, because when you say there are ministers and there are ministers.
Yes.
For instance, if a minister has been there 3 years so far, maybe he hasn't performed.
Yes.
He's got no business being there. So does it mean then that if a minister who's thoroughbred knows about the sector and then he's put in there, no matter the kind of files that is being hid or kept away from him, he will know how to run that ministry, as opposed to if you've got a political appointee who fits into the place?
You see, your capability of working as a minister is not whether you're a political appointee or not. The variables are many. One, who are you in the first place? From where are you coming? And what future do you think? There's the issue of there's the issue of knowledge, there's the issue of integrity. Integrity first, really, as far as I'm concerned. If you think you have a name which you want to protect, first and foremost, when you get there. Secondly, when you leave, do you still want to put your name intact? And thirdly, do you have an in-depth knowledge of where you are? Because, you see, the civil servant is happy when they bring a minister that is in an entity in that ministry. Because then they can always say this something is half full or half empty, and they are not telling a lie.
What if he's in an entity and he has integrity?
Well, his integrity would not say how we can get electricity. Bolage has integrity, but was absolutely an entity in engineering. And therefore he promised Nigerians that in 6 months he will fix electricity. Because he didn't know engineering. At the end of the month, Basanjo came to say, Libola Gelo is a politician. That's why he said you will fix electricity in 6 months. But if I'm an engineer, I know it cannot be fixed in 6 months. That's what I mean. You see, you can have integrity, but you must equally have knowledge in that field in which you have been posted. I'm sure a lot of people say, okay, if it's a good manager of men and materials, civil servants enjoy having somebody who is an entity who being head of their ministries, because that way they cannot play around with them. But when you know your subject and you are the minister in charge of that ministry that is respect of the subject, and you yourself have integrity, because there's an integrity crisis. That's one of the greatest problems. But if you have a name, and you know when you leave this place you still want to keep your name intact, yes, you will deal. Once you see someone that the smartest people on earth, whether you like it or not, they look at you, they think, okay, this man wants to look at every file. They keep on pushing file to you and bury you in file, and they're doing what they want to do outside. Because where Jack and they have smarted everybody in Lagos. Jack and they will go on the field on the road. If you bring a file and say, we have done this road, Jack and they will go in the night to go and confirm that we really did that road.
Files or no files? Files or no files.
Or even you carry the file, then go to the site himself. Okay, that is easy to do because Lagos State is a small place and you can drive around Lagos within hours. But when you're a minister, you see, the moment someone succeed, you want to realize you are a bookworm and you want to see everything in the file. Good. The man wants to look at files. Then the files will be coming to your office. And you will not be able to move out. And so whatever they are telling you in file is what you...
So you can't go and see the road.
You can't go and see it. So when the president interviews you say, oh, yes, we have fixed Lagos Ibadan Express Road is now properly, it has 10 lanes. That's what they told you in the file.